All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I just want to start off by saying thank you for coming to tonight's session. It's something we're very excited about. We have Jennifer Derby. She's going to be doing a little presentation on us to discuss, important things to consider when it comes to estate planning. This is part of our webinar series focused more on financial education and different topics that you may not be familiar with. With that being said, I think we can dive right into it tonight. We'll have time for any questions you have. Just type them on in the question box if you do have them. We will try to answer them as we're going. If for some reason we can't get to your question tonight, we will follow up with you with an email tomorrow. With that being said, Jennifer, if you want to tell us a little bit about your background and things we should be considering, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kaylee, and thank you, Jonathan, as well, for inviting me to do this webinar. I'm excited to get in front of everybody here, so thank you again for inviting me. So as Kaylee said, my name is Jen Derby, and I am an attorney with the law firm of Tucker Arensberg. I am an attorney in our estates and trust group at our firm. I am licensed to practice in Pennsylvania. So I handle, in our estates and trust group, I handle elder law, so that includes long-term care planning, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But I also handle estate planning, estate administration, and trust administration. So that happens when someone passes away. I'll help their family handle the estate or the trust administration. And I also help clients with business planning and business succession planning. So the first thing I'm going to talk about briefly is estate planning. And I think that is such an important topic because it's relevant for everyone. I tell clients all of the time that estate planning is important no matter what age you are. I firmly believe that every adult needs to have an estate plan in place. And I think part of the myth surrounding estate planning is that an estate plan needs to be extremely complicated, or there needs to be multiple trusts in place. I think a lot of times people hear the word trust and they sort of freak out, but it doesn't have to be that complicated, and it can always change over time. So I have a lot of clients that will talk to me. Typically, I feel like the event that happens in life is when a person or a couple is planning to have their first child. That's typically when they call me and they say, wow, we feel like we need to get something done here. We're having a kid, it's a big deal, we're kind of nervous, and we want to make sure we have all of our bases covered. But I believe that estate planning sometimes, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, oftentimes should happen even before that. Things happen unexpectedly. I don't even really have to say this, but if we think about basically the entire year of 2020, we know that things can happen that we do not anticipate. And unfortunately, that is not necessarily always going to occur for an elderly client. I've seen a lot of things in my practice, unfortunately, that issues that affect all different age ranges. And so really what I tell clients, the most important thing that you can get in place, and I think this should happen as soon as you turn 18, basically. You want to get your last will and testament done, so you want to make sure that you have your wishes down in writing in terms of really the two most important things are, one, who will handle your estate when you pass away, so who is your executor, and then who will receive your assets upon your passing. We get to designate who receives what when we pass away. You can leave your assets to your family, or you can leave your assets to a humane society or a charity or your church. I mean, you have the ability to make that decision, and so it's a very important decision to make, but you should always memorialize your wishes in your will. Secondly, a durable financial power of attorney is a really extremely important legal document that I think is often overlooked. Basically, what your power of attorney is doing is it's allowing someone to step into your shoes financially if something were to happen to you. And some powers of attorney will only come into effect upon your incapacity, so it depends on the way the document is drafted. But it's just very important that whether you're kind of regardless of your age, marital status, if you have children, if you don't have children, a power of attorney really helps you plan for an emergency situation. If something, if something happens to you and a bill has to get paid, your mortgage has to get paid, something like that, you can name an agent under that document to assist you if that becomes necessary. And so I think that's, I tell clients all the time, that's extremely important. And going along with that is a healthcare power of attorney. So that is kind of just as you would imagine, that is designating someone to make healthcare decisions for you if you're not able to make them yourself. And so again, we do have laws in Pennsylvania that will designate who will make those decisions for you if you're not able to make them yourself, and that's based on your relationship to that person. But you also can, if you don't necessarily want your spouse or your oldest child or someone to make those decisions, you can designate who will make those decisions for you. I'll talk briefly about trust planning. I think trust planning, again, is something that sort of is a myth to a lot of people, that they think it's very complicated and it's very overwhelming, and it doesn't have to be. Sometimes we have different types of trust. We have trust that we can create during our lifetime, and we have trust that we can create that only come into effect in our will, so a testamentary trust. I help clients all the time with trust, and you don't necessarily have to have $10 million for a trust to be a necessity. I mean, there's a lot of times when you might want to have a trust in place. For example, if you have assets that you're leaving to minor beneficiaries, so if your kids are under 18, or if you're leaving assets to a family member or loved one that has a special need, a trust may make a lot of sense even if you don't have a huge estate. So again, I think the most important thing, just because I know we don't, I could talk about trust for hours. I'm sure you don't want to listen to that, but I always like to tell people they're not as scary as you would think, and there's a lot of different reasons you may need one, and it's not just having $20 million. So when I talk to clients about estate planning, we're talking about getting their wills and their powers of attorney in place, but it's just as important to talk about your non-probate assets. And so this is a conversation that you could have with your advisor, with Kaylee, with Jonathan, about your beneficiary designated accounts and how those match up with your estate plan. So it's so incredibly important, and I think especially for this particular group, a lot of folks that work in the education area luckily have a nice retirement account, and that's a great benefit to have. But if that's your largest asset, then you want to make sure that you're planning for that appropriately. And so what I mean by that is, you want to have, if you'd like for your beneficiary designated accounts to pass the same way as you indicate in your will, then you have to check on these things. And so I work together with financial advisors very often to double check on beneficiary designations. You want to make sure that for your qualified retirement accounts, non-qualified accounts, again, just any account that has a beneficiary designated, which is your 401k, some pensions, depending, IRAs, those sort of things that you have. Really, the most important things are, you want to make sure your beneficiaries are still living. So if you have a spouse or someone else named that has passed away, you want to update that. And then you should have a contingent beneficiary as well. So if something happens to your primary beneficiary, you want to make sure you have a contingent as well. So the planning for these types of accounts is just as important as getting your estate planning in place. So a little bit about estate administration, and this can apply to trust administration also. But some of us may be a little bit familiar with this process. If you have been named as the executor in someone's will, then you've probably dealt with this before. But really, what estate administration means is you're handling the administration of that person's assets after they pass away. You're making sure that the assets go to the right person, that all of their bills and their debts get paid as necessary, and that inheritance tax gets paid. That's the one that we we don't like to talk about, but we have to pay inheritance tax. So the most important thing to know about estate administration or probate, the probate process, is that it doesn't have to be an adversarial process. I think a lot of people assume that you'll be going to court, you could potentially be fighting with your siblings over who gets what. I would say in my practice, probably 99% of estates that I'm handling will be resolved informally by a family settlement agreement, which means just sort of an informal settlement of the estate by all the beneficiaries signing off on an agreement. They're never going in front of a judge. A judge is not even really involved in the estate process at all. They are following the wishes of their loved one that passed away, but they're able to sort of work things out. So that's really best case scenario. But in general, the probate process is making sure a person's assets go to who they're entitled to after that person passes away. So another huge, very hot topic, especially in Western Pennsylvania, is elder law and long-term care. And so again, I do webinars on this. I just talked about elder law issues in another webinar earlier this week for 3 hours, so I can talk about it forever. But let me just hit the big points here. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, remember that the average cost of nursing home care in Pennsylvania in 2021 is $11,000 a month. If you right now math quickly in your head, you realize that paying for a year of nursing home is a six-figure expense. It's very, very, very expensive. So there are many things that you can do to pre-plan for long-term care.
Next slide.
So this slide is just going to show briefly the payment options for long-term care. And so there are really, these are kind of the 4 big categories of the types of long-term care in Pennsylvania. Again, there are at the assisted living personal care level, there are veterans benefits. For skilled nursing care, Medicaid is only going to cover the cost of skilled nursing care that's either in a nursing home or at home under the aging waiver program. So under that program, you're actually able to receive services at home, usually about 40 to 50 hours a week of care that's covered by Medicaid. So that's also a huge benefit. And last but not least, there's at-home caregiver services. Again, if it's under the Medicaid aging waiver program, then Medicaid is covering the cost of caregivers in your home. So that's a huge benefit to families that I help families with that very often. Again, a lot of eligibility requirements there, but it's definitely something to look into if you need that for a family member. But generally, I think this slide is helpful just to show there's a lot of different types of care and a lot of different payment options for every different type of care. So it's good to get yourself educated and figure out what's out there. The purpose of this slide basically is the title. So with long-term care, don't just rely on word of mouth. I talk to clients all the time who say that I literally had a client tell me that they took advice on long-term care from the deli person at Giant Eagle. And please don't do that. That's just like taking financial advice from, I don't even know. It's just not a good idea. So there's a lot of myths out there that your house is going to get taken from you, that if you apply for Medicaid, the state is going to take everything you have. Just make sure you talk to an elder law attorney, make sure you talk to your financial advisor, somebody who can get you in touch with somebody who knows what they're talking about, because I think the myths can really scare you. So.
Yeah, one of the questions that I know that we get a lot of is what happens to the pension, what happens to our retirement accounts, 403Bs, 457s, when it comes to long-term care, nursing home expenses and stuff like that. How does Pennsylvania handle those retirement accounts?
So it's a really good question, because Pennsylvania is actually a unique state. So we're one of, I think, 6 or 7 states that has an exemption so if there is, and this is a very specific exemption. So if you're applying for Medicaid and you're a married couple, meaning that you have a healthy spouse in the community and then a spouse that needs care for nursing home care, then the qualified retirement account of the community spouse or the healthy spouse is exempt for Medicaid purposes. So it doesn't have to be spent down. That's a huge, huge exemption we have in Pennsylvania that doesn't exist in every state. And so that's another reason why you want to talk to an elder law attorney before doing a spend down, because you don't have, if you have, you know, if husband and wife are married, husband needs to go into the nursing home and wife has a 403B, then we don't have to spend that down. That's a huge, huge thing. So it's very important to know all the rules and how everything works together.
But the husband's account would have to be spent down in that scenario?
That's right. That's right. But, you know, again, if you're armed with this information and you know beforehand, I can't tell you how often I talk to married couples who say, oh, well, my husband had to go into the nursing home, so we depleted wife's IRA because we just wanted to, you know, we didn't know where to get the money from, and that's just what we thought to do. But the problem you run into there is if a husband needs the care and we're getting his care paid for somehow, what happens when wife needs care 5 years from then? If she's got nothing left and her retirement accounts are gone, what are we going to do? So that's why that exemption exists, because we want to make sure that there's money available for just cost of living and life for the healthy spouse.
Perfect. One other thing too is that I am working with elder care attorneys for a bunch of years. I know if any of you guys that are on this webinar are thinking about reaching out to Jennifer, here's all of her information on the website here. One of the things, Jen, I know at least I tell my clients when they come in and meet with you guys is bring your whole family. You know, some people don't want to bring their spouse or their kids. You know, I think it's important to have the whole family involved in this conversation. Nobody wants to talk about this stuff, but I can't tell you how many clients I've had where I've had somebody who's passed away and the spouse, the kids, everybody was on the same page. They all knew what was going on, and it made their life so much easier when that individual finally did pass away.
Right.
You know, if you're somebody on this call who likes to have your ducks in order and likes to make sure that, you know, you don't have to be scrambling at the end of your life, making sure that all these things are figured out, that's what Jen does. She makes things very easy and simple when those decisions are needed to be made.
Right. I think something I tell clients all the time that, you know, hopefully maybe this hits home with some of you. I see this all the time. Essentially, we put off having these conversations because they're really hard conversations to have. I tell clients every single day, I basically talk about death for a living. But when I'm talking about it in my own life, when I'm doing my own estate planning documents, it's just as hard as it is for everybody else. It's not an easy conversation to have. I fully recognize that. But what I have seen happen way too many times is someone will put off having the conversation because it's a hard conversation, and something happens to that person unexpectedly, and that leaves their family with a mess. And they're left with a mess in a situation where they're grieving and they're just going through the motions at that point because they've lost a family member, and they're going through all the emotions of that on top of there being a mess for their estate. And so if nothing else, you know, think about the importance of just leaving things sort of tied up in a bow with a bow for your family members if something were to happen to you. I mean, and again, I talk to clients all the time that say, you know, I handled the estate for my mom, for example, and she had everything organized. She had her will done appropriately. She had lists of who got all of her jewelry. You know, everything was laid out for us, and I want to do the same thing. You know, that's you know, really, you know, it's really, really important to get this stuff in order, just so that whenever your family has to handle it, they have a roadmap and they know what they need to do.
As a family that when I was a little bit younger before I got into this industry that did not listen to an elder care attorney, that's why I love you guys now. So,
well, thank you. We appreciate that.
All right. Any questions that you guys have? These videos are going to be sent out to everybody who attended or wasn't able to attend. Kaylee, if you want to go over all this stuff, which is awesome.
Yeah, so, you know, as I said at the beginning, we were really excited to do this webinar with Jen. It's a topic we haven't covered in our series before, and it's something that we want to continue doing. Like I said, the goal is really just to give you some exposure to some topics that you may not think about, but you should be aware of. So this is the list of our upcoming webinars. You know, we do them every month. You should get an invitation the same way you did. If you have particular interest in one of these and you want to make sure you get the invitation, feel free to reach out to us. This is mine and Jonathan's contact information. You can email us, give us a call. You saw Jen's information. If for some reason you missed it and you need to get in contact with her, you can always reach out to us and we'll share it. You know, it seems like we didn't have any questions. I think, Jen, you did an awesome job at kind of telling us what we need to know. But if questions do come up, you know, we'll reach out to you and hopefully you can answer them. Other than that, we don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, especially with all these tornado warnings. So thank you for coming. And Jen, thanks again for sharing that information with us.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Kaylee and Jonathan, for having me. I apologize for the tornado internet interruption, but I'm happy to help with any questions anyone has. But thanks again for having me.
Take care.
Thank you.